diminish now.
Thank you, Donna. So can we hear us? All right. Awesome. I think I'm having a Barbara Streisand moment. I'm nervous, but I can sing. No, I think I'm having a Oprah moment. If, I would like to greet you. How many of us here are from outside the US? Can you raise your hand? Oh, okay. But you know Oprah, right? She's the Jesus. Anyway, this is the Oprah style of greeting, so I'll do the greeting. One of you will say 1, 2, and 3, and I will do it. So who would be the volunteer for 1, 2, 3?
You.
All right, Scott.
1, 2, 3.
Buenos dias! Buenos dias. So today I'm presenting on emerging markets, especially China, India, Chindia, and there has been extensive coverage about this particular topic. For the past decade has been the rise of these two emerging economies, almost becoming a powerhouse of the world economy. When I was growing up in India, the first time I ever tasted Coke was in 1997. We were deprived of hamburgers and McDonald's and KFC. Means the markets were pretty much closed. Same thing to a high degree in China, India, and now these two economies have opened up their doors, and we are seeing massive industrialization. We are seeing massive inflow of capital, and we are seeing a dominant labor force, which is highly educated, emerge from these two countries. So today I'm going to my agenda is to showcase what's happening in terms of advantages which these two countries have as emerging economies. Secondly, what I want to showcase is how does this change the game for developed economies, specifically United States of America. How many of us are from United States of America here? Japan? Okay. China? India? Any country cousins? Country cousins of mine? No, none of my country cousins today. Anyway. What I do, I would focus also a little bit on Japan, since we also have Japanese presence here, and then a little bit into Europe and US. These are the three big economic powerhouses in a way, and how these developed countries have to progress in order to be competitive, and instead of competing for that small pie, bake a bigger pie so that everybody gets a bigger share, including China, India, United States, Japan, Europe, and other emerging markets can join in, leading to a world where it's less about win-lose situation, but more about a win-win situation for countries, and that's what trade is about. But I will also highlight that even though the economists saw trade as a win-win situation, it is turning out to be otherwise in some instances. And we as companies and we as individuals have this challenge now to stay competitive in an environment where trade is not always fair. It is free, and it's going to be more free, and globalization is here to stay. And how do we stay competitive in this global market? So I will provide recommendations for your companies and also for you as an individual of staying competitive in this particular market. So with that said, I want to highlight some of the strengths of China and India if they kind of merge. So if China and India were to marry, then Chindia would be born. Chindia would be the largest economy in the world if they are together, means no divorce, nothing. In 15 years' time, 15 to 20 years time frame, they would be the largest economy in the world put together. China's model of economic development has been a massive mobilization of capital and labor, huge amount of foreign direct investment which has taken place in the past decade. large-scale manufacturing and competing on the world market based on cost advantage. So cost advantage has been the major competitive advantage of China in terms of competing. India's model for development has been, India always had these private, to a certain degree, privatized capital markets. There is more free flow of money to a degree. The business models are more focused on high quality services and products and precision batch manufacturing, high-end engineering, as all of you know, and software. Those are the strengths of India. So India is relying on its strengths in high-tech engineering and has not really in competition with China in terms of cost per se, but in terms of high-tech technology and quality, it has been trying to position itself. China's GDP has been growing at almost 9.5% to 10%. India has been around 6 to 7.5% range. Both these nations possess strong fundamentals as of now to keep growing at this pace, maybe probably between 8 to 10% for decades. And in 30 years, it is anticipated that if Pakistan and India don't blow each other up or something, India might be the third largest economy, overtaking Germany. And in few years, China would overtake US as #1 in GDP. In fact, the OECD estimates are that by 2025, the Chinese economy, the GDP, would account for 25% of overall global GDP. And followed by US, which would be 18%, Europe 10%. Another interesting fact about China and India, they are producing almost 500,000 engineers and scientists a year. Vis-a-vis us here are producing somewhere in the range of 70,000 or so. Both these nations possess a strong and emerging youth. There are almost, they are anticipating 2012, there are almost 550 million young people in India who are going to be below the age of 25. That's because of the population of US and Canada and Australia and a lot of Western European countries combined. And the interesting thing is that these two countries have more people, have more well-trained young people. So they can put more brains at a lower cost. And the result of this would be more innovation to the global economy. So right now we are not seeing that kind of innovation because of lack of institutional framework to protect intellectual property in China and to some degree in India. But as these institutions evolve and protect your intellectual capital, like copyright infringements and all that, there would be a more boost in innovation in these two countries, and they would also be fire engines of innovation. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on how culture in each country affects the likelihood of more innovation in the future?
China and India share pretty much similar in broad general stroke, a similar cultural characteristic. They are both collectivist countries, that means group orientation, and they are very high power distance orientation. That means power distance is the boss and subordinate relationship. It's like, that if you are younger, then you always look up to the elder. And how many of you in the US just call your professors doctor? Dr. So-and-so. Very few. In India, China, they always like doctors this, doctor that. There is a high status consciousness in these countries. Just combining the high status consciousness and high collectivism, it leads to a spirit of conformance and spirit of what I'm trying to say is subordination to some extent. Hey, you are older than me, you are in a higher position than me, so you know the best. those things do stifle competition, and those things do stifle innovation to a degree. But institutional frameworks, as they evolve, the institutions as they evolve, they can provide that artificial infrastructure to bring people in an office space where those things are subsiding behind an organizational culture. So the organizational culture grows, and the organizational culture around innovation and strong institutions around innovation help these people to, and help this technology workforce to go forward and innovate. And Chinese government, for example, knows that its comparative advantage in cost would not last long. You know, how many of us have watched Star Trek and the aliens who go from planet to planet and scavenge the planet, and then they go to another planet? And I see some similarities with some organizations. Don't quote me. No, I should not, because it's been video recorded. I could have named some corporations like that, but there are some major big retail corporations, if you mean wink and nod kind of corporation. And they are there in China for cost arbitrage opportunities, and I will show you some stats. And already the Chinese labor is getting more expensive. As that happens, they will move to another country, maybe Vietnam, maybe some other Laos, maybe Cambodia. Chinese government knows this, and they are already investing in R&D. They're encouraging companies to bring their high technology and R&D services into China and do the R&D work in China too. So Chinese government is very aware of that. Some of the strengths of China as of now are their massive GDP growth and their massive FDI, which has flowed into this country in the past decade, which almost accounts for half of their GDP. So FDI has been a propeller of growth, especially in manufacturing, and now the Chinese financial system and other services, telecom, these sectors are now open, and they are now seeing the boom in this FDI. FDI is foreign direct investments. China's manufacturing, India cannot compete on that at all. In fact, one of my cousins was telling that in the malls in India, there were no malls when I was growing up, but now they have malls there. A lot of products are basically made in China. Means when I was growing up, nothing was made except in India, and that's what we bought, basically. So labor advantage, their consumer class is growing, their per capita income has tripled, has really tripled in a generation. That's a huge middle class which has emerged in China, and they want those services, they want new products, they want the Buicks, Buick is really popular in China. They want these kind of, all these products, and thus there is some degree of innovation happening there. Plus, having a high GDP is not all that important if you don't have a high savings rate. Case in point, United States of America. Our GDP surpasses almost any other country. Means the GDP here is the largest GDP in the world. But the saving rates, anybody would like to guesstimate or estimate the saving rates in the US?
2%.
What?
4?
Yeah, below 5% range, yes. It has improved since the recession, but long term we don't know as of now, but it's probably going to be a little bit better than before. China and India, their saving rates range from anywhere between 25% to 35% in India to almost 50% in China. So these consumers are not just buying cars and products using debt. They are financing these things by their savings. So that's real money which is flowing in the economy. Heavy state intervention is also, to some extent, an advantage to Chinese companies, where the Chinese government is subsidizing the infrastructure to a great degree, subsidizing various raw materials, subsidizing to some extent the labor, and most importantly, the currency. And that kind of gives the products coming from China to a certain degree an unfair advantage, even though it's a free trade. But to some extent, because of heavy state intervention, the U.S. manufacturer who's manufacturing in Vermont, USA, would have to some degree a disadvantage because artificially their currency is kind of inflated, and they can export the same products and they will have actually a lower price compared to the U.S. Price. And I will show you some estimates by the agencies that the yuan can float further down and still be competitive. But the Chinese government is still hesitant to do that. They have a strong, large population base. They also have an educated workforce. Some challenges for China. The one-child policy, on one hand, was a way for China to kind of make up for the population growth. But on the other hand, it will peak by 2015. And then you will have a massive aging population. The same challenges lie with Japan, with South Korea, with China, a lot of Western European countries. Underachievers in area of software still. Lack of innovation and industry collaboration in China due to the lack of institutions which can protect intellectual property rights, and also to a certain degree culture is an issue. Since I'm in academia, I see a lot of Chinese students coming to United States for education. And what's also happening is that the Chinese government, previously the Chinese education system was based more on learning and memorizing and regurgitating that stuff during the exam. Similar educational system also was in place, or still is in place in India. Now these governments are trying to copy not copy, but learn and innovate based from the Western system, the US system, where it's less about memorizing and more about learning and applying and developing those leadership skills. And the governments of these countries are encouraging that in their educational system. So we will see a more entrepreneurial workforce emerge as this new generation gets started that way. It's
In terms of the American system of education and the way we teach students now, from low grade levels all the way through, there's been a lot of change recently, and I see more and more change coming, especially with innovation and technology and all of that. Do you think that India and China can actually notice, see that, recognize that, take advantage of that, and actually skip the US system and go straight to better systems? Is there any movement in that direction there?
I don't know, honestly speaking.
Because they should.
They should.
They don't need to go through the US system
But
and then get better. They should just go straight to the better.
There are parallels in other sectors.
Yeah.
Case in example, telecom. They've already leapfrogged. That means they just
Yeah.
leapfrogged the telephones, and they are
Yes.
already in the villages in India
Yes.
where they never had a telephone. They're actually using cell phone. Where they never had those kind of services, now they are using internet to get grain prices and when to sow their grains and all that kind of stuff. So they have leapfrogged in certain areas. And just recently, the ambassador of India was visiting, and there was a speech by her at her university, and she mentioned that the Indian government is propelling around 400 new universities and educational institutions which are going to be developed in the next 10 years in India. So the Indian government is actually looking at enhancing the scope of education and and when I was growing up, there were very few universities, and just my education is in the business field. I wanted to do MBA. Very few seats, millions of people trying to get into that. Around 16 million, I would think, because by 2012 we will have around 22 million people who will be competing for these educational opportunities in India. 16 million people. There are less than 200 universities to take care of that in India. When I was growing up, at least, and that was not ancient by any standards.
Wow.
But there was a huge competition for a seat of 60 seats in a class. 10,000 people are competing, and just imagine the kind of competition, and that's the similar kind of competition they have in China too. So.
Thank you.
lack of property and intellectual property, I've already spoken. When you have heavy state intervention, lack of private ownership, to a certain degree, you also have wasteful spending and operational inefficiencies, which are part of the Chinese economy. And they are the most wasteful user of oil in the world. But on the other hand, don't forget, do you know which country is on the leading edge of environmental sustainable technologies? Which country do you think is on the leading edge or the biggest exporter of environmental technologies?
China.
Not China.
Not China.
Pardon?
It's not China?
No.
Oh, so
As of now, at least. It's Germany.
Germany.
Germany is leading in that field, but China is the second close second, and US is nowhere close there still. But the Chinese government is realizing, and if anybody means, how many of us have gone to China and seen the pollution there? My gosh! Then, how many of us have gone to India, New Delhi or Bombay, and seen the pollution there? It's awful.
No, but at the same time, don't you think the last 10 years it got a lot better? Because I still remember that about 10 years ago when I was actually opening the office in China, I couldn't see that the first floor of the building after about 2 p.m. was actually that bad. Now at least I can actually see the floor.
I'll be visiting India, then I'll be able to compare it from 2000, early 2000, when I was
There's probably a webcam pointing at it right now if we wanted to look.
To a certain degree, also, China represents some political pressure, and to a certain degree, their ideology does not really fit with a free world mentality, where everybody has an equal right and freedom of speech. And those are the challenges which I hope that we as a world address. And I'm pretty sure the Chinese people, as the prosperity grows, would go for it. And perhaps the Chinese government might evolve further in a better sense. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. Then as I was telling you, comparatively speaking, China is still their financial institutions, their currency is still not free-flowing, they're still very controlled compared to India. So that's one area where China is still lagging behind. HIV, disease prevention, bird flu, those kind of issues, public health issues are crucial and are a big challenge in the Chinese government. Some strengths of China, and I'm quoting the Cisco's Scheinman, and he says, we came to India for the cost, we stayed for the quality, and now we are here for the innovation. And that kind of answers your question too, that yes, it's the organizational culture which is now being developed, which is superseding to some extent the national culture and providing an artificial incubator for these kind of entrepreneurial things to emerge. By mid-century, population in India would be around 1.6 billion and 220 more million workers than China in 2020. It's because the Chinese population will peak and then it's going to start declining, while the Indian population probably won't. India has achieved 6% growth rate with half the investment which China has received in terms of FDI. So India's growth has not been propelled by FDI, which is foreign direct investment. It accounts for the 35%, it will account for around 35% of the GDP within a decade. So it is increasing, but till now India's growth has not primarily been because of FDI. It has also been because of entrepreneurial tendencies of Indian firms going outside India and tapping emerging markets, South Africa and Commonwealth, the Russian Federation and other countries. Indian saving rates are about 28%, which are supposed to go up to even 37%. So that's a good sign. That's a good sign for companies like yours that these consumers will have the money to pay for your products and services. I think there was a huge rush of companies to tap these markets of China and India and in the past decade, and there was massive overcapacity in some industries. And the reason was that the companies overestimated the middle class. The middle class is there, it's growing, but didn't have that purchasing power. So, but now, due to the high saving rates, they purchase, and plus the economic growth, their purchasing power is increasing, and they have the money to buy the products. Which, few more strengths. They have a large telecom, commercial real estate sector. Their retail sector, when I was growing up in 1990s, mid-80s onwards, there wasn't any retail industry really. There were mom and pop stores, and you go and tell, I want this product, that product, that product. And then the grocery person would pick up those products and give it to you, or send somebody to take it to your home. Now you have malls. Now you have Walmart collaborating with Indian company, Bharti Telecom, trying to establish retail presence. There is huge opportunities in the retail sector for India. My gosh, there's more than 1 billion people there now to be serviced, plus their purchasing power is increasing. Another interesting thing is they have a high skilled talent. Just imagine this example, just 10,000 people competing for 60 seats. So what you are getting is creme de la creme, if my French is right. That's the kind of competition you see. So obviously you are getting the best and the brightest into the educational system, and then the educational system tries to prepare them, and then you have this high-skilled labor force, and you have institutions like IITs and IIMs. IITs are Indian Institutes of Technology, and IIM stands for Indian Institutes of Management. They are heavily subsidized by the government. So, like, if you're going to do your MBA in Wharton or Harvard, you'll be paying far, far much more than 100,000, probably much more than that. In India, it won't be that much at all. It will be probably less than $10,000 or less. So, Indian government actually subsidizes. When I was doing my bachelor's degree, I think my total one-year cost would have been around $300. That's pretty much, including my books and the fees. So that's fueling the entrepreneurship, that's fueling the new industries which are emerging. So we are seeing a talented IT tech workforce, which you see all over the Silicon Valley, also coming from India. And then the Indian, there has been a massive change from my generation to this new generation in India. Whereas my generation, it was that if you want to make your dreams true, you come to the United States of America. Now, if you want to make your dreams true, you kind of come up with the entrepreneurial idea or work for a company which is open and innovative and grow in India. And we are seeing that kind of shift happening in India. So, Indian population is young, it is highly educated, and it's going to increase, it's going to grow faster. And the challenge for China is that it needs to get rich, very rich, before it gets old, so that they can have the liability, the costs to be taken care of the aging population. IT service sector is that strength of India, which is much larger, 5 times larger than of India, is much larger than China. And a strong high-end manufacturing, as I mentioned before. And then some weaknesses, and then I have something really sizzling for you to kind of start some thinking process. But some of the weaknesses, lot of bureaucratic red tape. Has any of your companies or you personally been involved in setting up ventures in India and faced that kind of red tape? Yeah. Any examples come to the mind from the audience?
What do you mean by red tape?
Bureaucratic hurdles, getting licenses, greasing the palms, underhand dealing sometimes. When I'll give you an instance. Oh no, I can't. But in India, you have to. Sometimes bribes are common, and red tape is common, and it's a stifler to competition, stifler to free market, stifler to innovation. So stifler, right? Is that right? Or I just pull a pillar. If India grows at current level, at around 7% growth rate, it still has a challenge because 70 million people will be still unemployed by next year. That's a huge population of Indians, which that young talent which is not being tapped. That's a huge loss of productivity for India, and that's one of the reasons why the Indian ambassador was telling that the Indian government is thinking of putting 400 universities. By the way, in 2010 also India opened up and relaxed its regulations for foreign universities to establish campuses in India. So we are seeing more foreign universities, including my own university, which we are thinking of exploring educational opportunities in India and be able to work with the Indian government, Indian institutions to create a high-skilled labor force there. India will have to grow at no less than 8.5, actually more like 9 to 10% GDP to be able to be competitive, remain competitive. Environmental pollution, public health issues, and then socio-economic issues are huge. Did you know which is the most populous nation in the world in terms of Muslim population?
Indonesia?
Indonesia, which is the second largest country.
India.
Obviously. India is the second largest country. We don't think that way, but yes, it has the second largest Muslim population in India. And there is time to time tensions and those kind of tussles between, so they have to take care of those issues. HIV and AIDS, because of taboo, cultural issues and high masculinity, which is another cultural trait of certain countries, are there. And then you always have this tension between China, India, Pakistan. India has had wars, couple of wars or more wars with Pakistan. I don't remember how many, but they've had wars with Pakistan. They had war with China. Still, there are those kind of geopolitical tensions between these countries. Hindu growth rate was a term used back in 50s and 60s to tell that the productivity was very low in India. And I think that primarily the reason was the high level of bureaucracy, which was in place in India almost before independence. In 1947, India got independence. Before independence, if you wanted to be something and you wanted to work in, and grow and professionally grow, you have to go for civil services by the British government, and then get into the civil services and you become a bureaucrat. And that's what most Indians looked up to, and they created a very large bureaucracy, and that stifled the competition and the growth of India for a long time. And still around 200 million people, that's more than the population of Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Netherlands, Scandinavia, put together, subsist on really less money, $1 per day. So that's a huge challenge. Means all of you have seen, who have visited India, you have seen the kind of income disparity of poor and rich. Now comes something. Now those are the fundamentals which I wanted to kind of showcase. Now I'm going to kind of showcase how is this going to be impacting our world in overall. Cheap supply of high-skilled labor will drive wages. Already it has some impact. Blue-collar outsourcing has already taken place to a huge extent. A lot of manufacturing has gone out from the US. White-collar workers are also feeling the pinch of outsourcing and competition from these countries. Both are being impacted in terms of wages, and then what's happening is that the loss in terms of wages, which you will see, will not be compensated by cheap, cheap imports which you're getting from China and Walmart and other stores, It's not gonna, you're getting cheaper products, but once your wages are down, it kind of, actually it's like, it doesn't really catch up to that. The problem is this, is according to academia and some economists, it's possible that in such a scenario, the winners would be WMNs, which is Western multinationals. A lot of US multinationals are actually, yes, they are US, but majority of it, more than 50% of their revenues are coming from outside the US. So even though they are a US multinational, majority of their products are being sold in these emerging markets, which are huge for them. And they're getting this huge advantage in terms of labor cost and other areas and cheaper workforce, more brains to put on, and in terms of innovation at a cheaper rate. The gain which will happen is the multinationals, and how many of us invest heavily, are lucky enough to have the money to invest. If you have a lot of money to invest into these companies, then yes, you are the winner. Because if you're a shareholder, multinationals companies are responsible to their shareholders. And I would like to differ a little bit, because I would think it's not just the shareholder but the society as a whole. But yes, if you go based on Milton, it's the shareholder, and the gains will basically be dispersed to the shareholder. That's one problem. Secondly, what is happening is we are seeing that it started with manufacturing and low-end engineering. Then it started with high-end engineering, and now you are also seeing white-collar jobs being exported out of the U.S. or some developed countries level. What we are seeing is eroding of comparative advantage of these developing countries, and I will tell you why and how it is this happening in a second. But let me just show you why is this happening? Why is this comparative advantage eroding? Because one of the major factor has been the cost arbitrage which has happened. For blue-collar workers, the cost in the US is about 15 to 20 times higher than in China and India. So obviously, you're seeing a lot of that jobs already move out. Junior engineer in the US is about 9 to 10 times more expensive than in case of India and China. For more experienced engineers, US is about 5 times more expensive. Department heads cost for in the US is 3 times higher. Although at a CEO level, senior executive C-level, the wages are kind of, if we're going to have CEOs here make $20, $30, $40 million, then the Indian CEOs won't stay behind. And they're going to buy a dog for $1 million. I was just hearing somebody bought a dog for $1 million. So, like, okay. These are some of the reasons why Sony, for example, just an example, has moved virtually all its production of consumer goods from Japan to China. IBM has transformed its services business into heavily Indian-led global enterprise to a great degree. So they are not just going for just like short term. They are seeing this cost arbitrage as a huge opportunity and using that to gain competitive advantage. So now comes something for you to think about. With the basis covered and the foundation laid, I want to introduce you to the concept of immiseration. Immiseration or immiserating is something which has been now started to be discussed in academic circles, and that is, we thought free trade is great and it's a win-win situation, and if you go back to the East India Company, one of the truly the first few multinationals in the world, the East India Company, which the 1800s or before, and they expanded. The company, basically this British company, expanded into various colonies, and you had in U.S. and in West Indies, in East Indies, India, and the prevailing paradigm, the prevailing trade paradigm was mercantilism, which is that we will get, for example, we will get the raw material from the colonies. So they get the raw material from the colonies, bring it to Great Britain, add value to that particular product. So they get cotton from Egypt and India, they bring it to Manchester, England, they add value and make garment, beautiful coats and shirts and this and that, and then Marks and Spencer's, for example, sends those things to its colonies, so they get exported. So what's happening here is they're getting raw material at a cheaper price, they're adding value, putting together a shirt which will cost far much more than the cotton which went into making it, sell it to the colonies, and it was more like a zero-sum game that I win, you lose. But mercantilism kind of showed some fatal flaws, and it wasn't successful. And the economist basically told that, or the most recent economic theory which talks about the theory of comparative advantage, wherein if United States has a comparative advantage in semiconductors, so it should make semiconductors in the US, and if Mexico has comparative advantage in producing the computer monitors, so Mexico should do the computer monitors because it might have cost advantage and certain other advantages. And then these two countries trade with each other. So it's more of a win-win game. Keeping under consideration that the government intervention is not humongous. That means government is not putting import duties, huge import duties and penalties and anti-dumping regulations which are unfair sometimes. In those cases, the government is distorting the free market, and then the theory of comparative advantage kind of falls down. And then the government's heavy hand makes it less of a win-win situation, but more of a win-lose situation, which we saw in the past decade in case of emerging economies like China, India, where the governments had a very strong hold in terms of manipulating the trade by artificially keeping the currencies low, artificially creating trade barriers, artificially increasing the import duties on certain products, making the car manufacturers make sure that they produce the parts in the US, in China. And if you don't produce those parts in China, you import them, but your import duties can be huge. So this way, what you're doing is artificially creating an environment where a comparative advantage of a nation is not being properly leveraged. Instead, you're saying that, no, I want to make the semiconductors, and I also want to make the computer computer terminals. So I want to take everything. I want to make everything. And then what happens is that, because this is a very short-term approach, but this leads to immiseration. And what happens is that trade between two countries where you have heavy state intervention, government intervention, which favors that particular country short-term, it leads to bleeding of the comparative advantage of the other nation, where the government does not have that strong hold over that free trade. So I'll showcase here. According to Professor Bhagwati, he's a well-known economist, country can be made worse off if the trade lowers the price of the products in which it has comparative advantage. So if US has comparative advantage in semiconductors, and because of trade with, let's say, China, and because Chinese yuan is artificially manipulated by the Chinese government, you have trade issues, you have, and subsidies, and cheap, artificially, to some extent, labor force. So, yes, you can manufacture semiconductors cheaper in China in the short term, and US would lose that competitive advantage because if China makes semiconductors, let's say a semiconductor costs, let's just in a hypothetical case, $10 in US and cost $5 or $6 in China, and then both these countries export it. Well, you as a company would pay $10 versus $6 for the same semiconductor? Probably not. So then what happens is that the US company would have to lower its price, obviously. Something around $7 and still say, oh, we are the best quality, we are this and that. Okay, you can still sell at $7 or $8, but not at $10. So what is happening is that by doing this, the area, the product, for in this case, the example is semiconductor, where US had a competitive advantage, but China is now manufacturing it at a cheaper rate. And now pulling the price of the semiconductor down, now the export income for that product is going to go down for the US too, right? So before it was producing and selling these, suppose semiconductors for $10, now it is doing it at $6. Now they're almost a $4 loss. Now think this in a magnitude of millions, billions and trillions of dollars. That's a huge loss of export earning for the country. And that is called the bleeding of the comparative advantage of the country. And that is to a certain degree what is happening in the case of US. And to a certain degree in case of Japan and some other countries. This might be happening as we offshore this software and chips and lower the cost of these products, in which US has the comparative advantage. So now you will think free trade is not good for US. Well, the answer is, maybe if you are very short-sighted, then yes, you might think, oh my God, the Chinese are manufacturing it so cheaper, so we should not do this and that. Well, long term, what happens is that the invisible hand, remember that? Or, I
Adam
guess,
Smith.
Adam Smith. There are forces of economy which do take into these things into consideration. Case in example, anybody been to China in this past year? Have you seen the prices in China? Inflation is rampant, right? And have you also seen the labor cost? They are spiking high. So China cannot maintain its labor advantage forever. It cannot artificially keep those prices down, because you will reach a certain point in that curve where artificially controlling the cost will be more expensive for the Chinese economy. So eventually, the free trade will break that barrier of where the government is trying to control and artificially manipulate the price versus the economic forces in long term which are trying to equalize it. And that is what we are already starting to see happen in case of a lot of these countries. Inflation is going to drive the prices up. The wage levels are going to drive the prices up. And then once you lose that cost advantage, then you have to think about where can I best make this product the best in which country, so that that country makes that product and I make the product which I can make best in this country, and then let's trade. And then the free trade kind of equals it out. So long term, there is potential for things to get better and for a bigger pie to emerge. So US, in short term, as a country, has this challenge that is to counteract this evisceration which is happening. And for this to happen, the economy of US, Japan, and other countries should be investing into innovation, high specialized value-added services, and don't just produce software engineers and programmers, but graduate people who can combine various different skills and technology and global relation and specialized skill. I was just talking to Bill yesterday, Bill Sullivan from IBM, and we were just talking about that engineering, a software engineer in the US is not competitive, because these companies can get a software engineer from India at similar skills at really much lower price. So what do you as a software engineer in the US need to have? You need to have that extra skill, and I think that's what you're doing here. Internationalization is still that skill which is not very widely taught. How many universities do you think teach internationalization? I-18N, I mean. I think that
Zero.
University of Limerick does a little bit. They have a master's in computational linguistics, but really, there's not many. In India, China, so that this skill is valuable, and I'm going to give you some tips on that. I do have 15 minutes, right? Or 10 minutes?
10.
10. So US, I'm going to first give the extreme makeover recommendation for US, and then for you, and for your friends and kids. Much of the deficit in the US is now being financed by Bank of China, Japan, and other countries, because they are buying our treasury bonds, which are still the safest bet around in the world. So we are still in good shape, because people are still willing to buy our treasury bonds. But our bargaining power is going down, economically speaking. Americans need to also save more, and the US government needs to boost exports. And the thing is that US has to be even further on top of innovation, because we know that innovation might get copied, or the life cycle of the innovation, the product which is coming out, might be drastically shortened, because it could easily go and get made cheaply in China or India or Brazil or Russia or some other country. So you have this very small window to develop these innovations. And then cannibalize them, and then come up with a newer innovation. So you have to be, the US economy, the US corporations have to be on top of it. I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit US centric, applies to Japan too, and to Germany and to other countries. We have to think about new technologies, nanotechnologies, fusion of different disciplines, IT and medicine and biomedical engineering and environmental engineering, environmental science. US needs to put pressure on China too to float its currency freely. And even with 15%, if the country's yuan trades 15% higher, it will not have significant impact based on Institute of International Economics. Then beef up the defense of intellectual property laws, which we lose almost $3.8 billion a year because of these. And software laws also subsidizes the Chinese industry artificially because they're not paying for that software then. And so US should bring these issues of fairness to the WTO and be more forceful about that. And then comes the, yes.
I guess my own experience in talking to people is that the same condition is in India, that there's quite a bit of pirating, maybe less now, but
Yes.
but quite a bit. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of emerging economies, Russia too,
Yeah, yeah.
other countries too, yes. And a lot of these emerging economies, it's not that they are just out for it, it's just because the institutions have not properly developed yet to enforce those things. So it is going to happen, it's just taking time for institutions to evolve. So this is what, since our audience is primarily here technology oriented, for our US technology graduates, it's really important to expand our skills and have a more of an interdisciplinary orientation. Localization, for example, I teach this in this area, and this area is so interdisciplinary. You need IT skills, you need cross-cultural skills, you need linguistic skills, you need basic technology, intercultural communication, technical writing. But localization is a very interdisciplinary field. How many universities in the US provide training in localization? A handful, not just a handful. So those are the kind of skills. What is happening, a lot of universities all over the world, including US universities, which are still the education system at the university level in the US is far more superior to any country, is that we are preparing our graduates and equipping them with skills which are old, for the old economy. We need to educate our new workforce to be competitive in the new skill. If you want to run after a job which is going to hop from one country to another, so you'll be hopping from, or this graduate might be hopping from Nigeria to India to Thailand, chasing the job. Instead, if you invest in your skills which are less offshoreable or less, I pulled a pill in again, less outsourceable, then you can actually be in a situation where the jobs follow you rather than you following the jobs. And I will tell you some core examples of those. But just having a software engineering degree is not enough. You need business strategy training. You need project management training. You need leadership skills. You need intercultural communication skills, innovative thinking and entrepreneurial tendencies, and this ability to think about what niche can I leverage with this kind of knowledge. And the knowledge, and the most important thing is this. VRI. I actually borrowed this concept from strategy literature in business. I won't go too much into it, but I want to showcase the concept. Actually, it's VRIO, but for individuals, I'm using VRI. Stands for, if you want to be competitive in this world as an individual and as a company, you need to create capabilities which are valuable, rare, and inimitable. Inimitable, that means cannot be copied as easily. Same applies for companies and same applies for you. There are differences. There are resources and assets, and there are capabilities. Companies which thrive on resources can stay in the job and play the game for a few years, but then their competitive advantage will be lost because resources are something which can be traded in the market, and you can buy resources from, you can pay and buy and get resources, trading resources. Capabilities are things which are difficult to put your hand on, difficult to imitate. It's like those organizational characteristics. Let's say GE's eco-imagination. GE has this huge effort in eco-imagination, and they are not only leveraging this idea of environmental sustainability from a societal, social responsibility perspective, but they are making money from it. And they are making huge savings from it. That's a capability which is very difficult to imitate by other companies. And GE can build on this capability. And if no other company can copy that particular capability, then GE has the advantage. Same applies to you. Seek out the resources, not resources, capabilities, sorry. Develop capabilities which are valuable and rare, first of all. Like I said, training in internationalization, training in localization, web globalization are just few fields where in the US I could count the number of universities offering these courses in my, just like 4 or 5 universities. Worldwide, perhaps I think in Europe you'll have a few, in Germany, Ireland, UK, not many. How many business schools are there in the world providing MBAs? Can you think of that? It's thousands. Okay, if you have an MBA, or if you have a degree in software engineering, millions of software engineers, millions of MBAs around the world, with specialization in marketing, in finance, in accounting. Gosh, it's so generic. If you're gonna compete for that, you're gonna be competing with another 50,000 people. And those highly skilled labor from India and China will definitely beat you on, at least in the price. If you're just going for the salary price, the company will be, hey, I can get those people cheaper. How many graduates are coming out with degrees in localization, internationalization in the world? Can you say millions? Probably not. Thousands? I wouldn't even go to thousands. I would think in a year's time, around less than 1,000 people actually with this kind of skill graduate from universities, because there are hardly any universities offering this kind of skill. Now you automatically become a rare commodity. And your skills become less imitable because, well, there are not many institutions in China and India who are preparing the workforce in those skills. These skills are emerging skills, and internationalization is not a static field, it's constantly developing. Talk to some experts, Daniel and Adam and Bill and Ulrich. Means this area is expanding and constantly evolving. So machine translation is evolving. Means there are community localization is another area which is evolving. This field is not static. Another field is, just for your friends and family, is another field which we will have comparative advantage in is environmental sustainability. How many universities are having master's degree in environmental sustainability? Very few, very few. If you want your kids or friends or family or yourself to be competing, you got to compete in a skill which is valuable, rare, and less imitable. And if you can develop those skills, I think you'll be in a global economy, you can thrive rather than see globalization as a threat and try to dodge the bullet like this. But be able to develop those skills and constantly renew yourself. I am constantly on my toes and reinventing myself as an academic because I know there is an academic in India who can do the same job for cheaper. So we as academics too have to be on our toes. Means nobody can be complacent, and actually that is great for the global economy because nobody is complacent and everybody is acquiring skills and everybody is being highly productive. The global economy, just imagine the scale of global expansion. I see the future of the globe very, very bright only if the most important pillar of global economy, which is treated as an externality, which is environment, is internalized by companies. And that's a whole different ballgame. But if we are not going to be environmentally responsible, the global economy means, gosh, environment is taken for granted raw material for all business services. the air you're breathing is taken for granted, do you pay for it? I think you should. And then see the quality of air go up. But yeah, keeping the environment intact and good, I think I see a great future for the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitish. We got started a little bit late. We have time for a couple of questions.
First of all, thank you very much for a great talk. I have a question to one of the bullet points you had about China, suggestions to increase the value of the yuan by 15%. You also made the point of the importance of the growth in China. The Chinese National Bank is actually, because 15% is often used as predicting, that 15% appreciation would not just kill their growth in exports, it would decrease their growth in exports. So how do you see that? And as an add-on question, even if it would work, looking at Japan, when the Japanese yen gave up the peg to the US dollar, we know that it ended in a series of economic bubbles and eventually in the Asian financial crisis. Do you see something similar building up with this long time of underappreciation of the yuan?
I see that, the bubble emerging in China because of the way the yuan is trading below right now. And yes, short term, China has an advantage in exports because of artificially keeping the yuan down. But you're comparing GDP figures with the inflation, with the what did I say, the yuan's 15%. There are many other factors, including inflation. So you have to take into consideration the inflation which is happening in the Chinese economy. A lot of Chinese are actually going to Hong Kong. Actually, in Hong Kong, the same product, toothpaste, will be a little bit cheaper than in China. So inflation and GDP growth would actually average out. And actually, long term, this 15% increase in the value of yuan would actually is the right value in a way. And that will actually, it will come. If the government does it now, it will forego some of those inflationary pains which are actually already happening. So it's up to the government. Should we do it now and get rid of this artificial system, or let the economy take its toll and have the bubbles, have the inflation?
This maybe was not coming into your talk, but it's something that I think is sort of like the great elephant in the room is energy costs. All that growth and all that prosperity will have quite a pull on energy costs, and you know, you mentioned that Germany right now is the kind of major force in that technology. But how does that maybe play into your presentation a little bit?
In terms of energy is the big silent elephant, as you said. In terms of just a very specialized example, manufacturing and transportation, it's a lot of American companies are realizing that transportation costs are going way off the roof. So manufacturing, yes, you will see that importance of energy cost. Services, you will not see as much because services don't need that high degree of energy function in there. So yes, in terms of that. And then energy demands in both India and China are increasing. Actually, the second largest economy in the world in terms of sustainable energy is China. Even though we hear about them putting up coal plants every now and then, they are the second largest. The Chinese government is taking it very seriously.
Right. So
they are developing. Plus, they are also one of the largest investors in Africa and trying to get the natural resources from there too.
Mm-hmm.
So that they have a good plan in terms of energy, and energy will play a huge role.
Right.
Definitely.
So, I think I would question some of the views as being an extension of how Americans think about economies and business, and just continuing to extend that. The idea that Americans are innovative, and because we're innovative, we can stay ahead through lots of innovation, really doesn't have legs because other countries now, other cultures,
Right.
are learning to be innovative as well.
Yes.
I'm not sure that borders matter so much anymore
Yes.
in terms of how we do business. And the idea that it's cheap labor that is driving the growth in China is not entirely true.
Yes.
I visited a plastics plant in China, and I said, I went and I expected to see thousands of laborers doing lots of little work. I went over, And there's one guy manning about 10 machines, high-tech plant doing semiconductor wafers.
Right.
And I said, where are all the laborers? And I said, well, where's the economy in what you do? He says, oh, we get cheap labor. I said, you got one guy working here. Where's the rest of it?
I agree, yes.
I'm not sure you probably understand. I'm not sure everyone else
Yes.
really understands the picture. In the plant, they don't have a lot of labor. What they did have is somewhat influenced by how the government organized zones of business. This plant was supported by assemblers, by other types of activities in order to bring the materials in. They were all co-located in the same little city. So unlike you were here and you create a business and you say, well, I have to get a company on the other side of the country and they're going to ship it to me. It's one little community all focused around semiconductors, plastic wafer manufacturing. And the ability to organize and create communities that are dependent and support each other, but now don't have some of the other difficulties we have because we're organizing in many different ways independently, is where the key advantage was. Because if you look around, the labor was minimal. It was a small part of what they were doing, plus the investment in technology. I think as we think about competing, I think information flow is so fast, we can't be focused on saving IP, protecting it, and hoping to charge for it. Just too easy to copy, or to get the idea, do it differently.
I think we need to, that's why I said we need to be on the cutting edge and cannibalize ourselves to some extent, our technology, cannibalize our own technology, and that kind of gives you an ultimatum. You can't keep rolling on this technology anymore once you cannibalize it. You have to come up with new. And the cycle of innovation is going to get shorter and shorter. And I agree completely with this idea of China. This labor advantage is not going to stand long. Yes, in initial few years it had this labor advantage, but the Chinese government is investing in that. Actually, I would recommend everybody to do a little bit of a Google search or a Yahoo search later on in the day and type industrial ecology parks. And just see these new innovative business models which they are incorporating. One company waste becomes another company's raw material, and these are all industrial park settings, and they are developing these ecosystems, industrial ecosystems. And it's just a great example